According to the Ministry of Balance article from Wargaming that accompanied this most recent update, the classic German legendary tier battleship Grosse Kurfürst was not the best performer and frequently made appearances in Wargaming's feedback channels. Her primary failing was durability, which Wargaming felt should be the defining feature of the ship. As a result, they increased her HP and made her upper superstructure saturate sooner, reducing the amount of damage she takes. And I'm happy to report that I think the buff was successful. The GK now enjoys 105.8k HP at base. I have it up to 111,000 because I've got Hyde at the helm. But I've played several games in it, and I've certainly noticed that it takes a lot less damage in a similar way to the Montana, which does, in fact, make this ship much more playable, I think, than it used to be. But there are still some issues that I think need addressing, and that is why I am showing you this match. This match is not going to really demonstrate the newfound tankiness of the Grosse Kurfürst in quite the same way as the Montana one I put up yesterday. Instead, it's going to demonstrate some tips for something I think a lot of Battleship players struggle with, and something related to the buff that GK needs, in my opinion, but did not receive, at least not yet. And that has to do with dodging torpedoes. So I think it's best to call the shots as they happen, and then I'll weave in my thoughts about the further buff as we go. We come around the corner of the Alpha Cap, we meet Montana, who is broadside to us, and we are, in fact, going to get a Citadel hit on that initial salvo, which is nice, 25,000 damage to the Montana. There's a Conqueror out there who has our broadside, but of course Conquerors often shoot HE. Do you see that rack of torpedoes, though, going to the right across the screen? Well, there are 5 destroyers on the enemy team, and clearly at least one of them is on the other side of this island chain directly to the left of the ship. So we activate the Sonar, and we pick up the Lucian. There is another destroyer right there, though, and we're about to see some torpedoes that are not deep waters headed our way through that gap. There's the other destroyer, the Z-44, and there are his torpedoes. So we knew they were there. We were prepared for it simply by noticing the torpedoes in front of our face a few moments ago. And as long as we continue on full speed across this gap, well, then we'll be able to avoid the torpedoes. But the sonar is almost gone. And we are going to have to worry about the other destroyer, the Lucian, who turned to the right and is probably headed toward the north of the map and just around the corner of this island to our left here. We're going to have to keep him in mind, and with him in mind, we are making a full turn. If we go broadside through that gap, we're probably going to take Lucian Torps. There they are. Of course, that means giving broadside to the Montana, but the GK, with its new survivability buff and its turtleback armor, should be able to withstand at least one salvo from the Montana with no problem. And there it is. I think prior to the buff, that particular shot might have done more damage, but hey, more durability, it's nice. And we are able to dodge the Lucian torpedoes, which sort of takes us in a circle around this cap. We're going to, again, have to be wary of more torpedoes coming through the gaps in between the islands from the other destroyer, the Z-44. But we have successfully dodged the torpedoes from 2 destroyers in the opening with the help of the sonar. And that leads me to my point about the other buff I think the GK needs. There is another legendary tier battleship in this game. It's called the Schlieffen. It also has the sonar consumable. And let me just read to you the specs of the Schlieffen's sonar consumable. It has a ship detection range of 5.7 km, a torpedo detection range of 3.9 km. Compare that to GK. Our torpedo detection range is 4 km, so 0.1 km better than Schlieffen, and our ship detectability range is 6 km even, so 0.3 km better than Schlieffen. However, our sonar duration is 60 seconds, whereas Schlieffen's is double that, at 120 seconds or 2 minutes. Why? What is the justification? That is the question that I have as we take one of two torpedoes that we're actually going to eat in this battle. That is the question I have for wargaming, though, because I feel like 0.3 km better ship detect and 0.1 km better torpedo detect does not in any way justify the 50% reduction in sonar duration. I think the sonar duration on GK should at least be 120 seconds to match Schlieffen, even if it does have slightly better detection parameters. I don't think that slight betterness justifies the extreme nerf to duration, and I think if the sonar duration were buffed, then the GK would be in a really, really good place. If Wargaming does feel that the extra detection is too much, they could nerf the detection to 5.7 and the torpedo detection to 3.9 to make it match Schlieffen, and this would still be a really, really powerful sonar that would be catching this Lucian in his smoke if we had it activated. We don't need it, and Lucian goes down. More on the torpedoes, of course. Lucian is gone. He did not have any angle to launch torpedoes at us, so we don't have to worry about that. Our sonar is almost off cooldown, and we do need to worry about torps from the gearing. He's sitting there broadside, so obviously we knew that set of torps was coming, which is why we intentionally beached ourselves on the island. But of course, that makes us stationary, and one thing we don't want to be when there are this many destroyers around is stationary. We immediately start reversing, which is good because there are more torpedoes coming from the Z-46 in that direction. But if we reverse at full speed, since we started after directly hitting that island, that's going to be enough to get us out of the way of those torpedoes and actually dodge this set. So I think you could distill the torpedo dodging tips for battleship players into about 4 tips, 3 of which have to do with battleships themselves. Number 1, do not sail in a straight line. That seems obvious, but the battleship has a rudder, and I think a lot of battleship players don't realize that. Use the rudder. Never sail in a straight line. That's tip number 1. Number 2, vary your speed. Don't always be going at full throttle. Change it up. Go at 3/4, 1/2, 1/4, even go into full reverse at some points. And then finally, in addition to rudder and speed and not sailing in a straight line, play destroyers and get proficient at them. It really helps to know what it looks like from the destroyer's point of view in these torpedo trading transactions. They are pointing a torpedo indicator at you, and that indicator is showing your course at that moment that they are aiming at you. Of course, it changes with every movement you make, but torpedoes have to travel in a straight line. And often they take at least 30-40 seconds to reach the target, depending on how far away the destroyer is when they launch them. That's a lot of time for you to move out of their way, and you can only do that if you are A, moving, B, changing your course, and C, changing your speed. And it helps if you have experience in destroyers because you know what it looks like on the other side, and it's not quite as easy as some battleship players make it look. You can see, hopefully, we're making it look fairly hard in this game for these destroyers that have tried to torpedo us and only succeeded in hitting us twice. The gearing is left in front of us, so there's a little bit more to this torp dodging as we push into him without any charges of the sonar consumable. You could look at this game and tell me that the GK has sonar and not every battleship does, so therefore not every battleship can do this. But that's not true. We're going to dodge more torpedoes from the gearing, even without the benefit of the sonar, as we continue on in this match. Those are the primary tips, though. And I submit to you that you will not be a good battleship player unless you get proficient in destroyers and at least learn how to play them adequately. That will help you much more in your battleship gameplay than frustratingly going over and over and over again and eating torpedoes. You'll learn a lot more from the other perspective because you'll find that it's not as easy as it might seem to you if you are constantly being sunk by torpedoes when you get into the helm of the destroyer and you find a battleship that does in fact know he has an engine and a rudder. Also, a good thing, which you'll note in this game, is at no point did we ever stop to try to bow tank anything. We don't ever want to compromise our maneuverability because that makes us a more vulnerable target to torpedoes. As far as further torpedo dodging tips, well, we're pushing into the gearing. He's taken out our friendly destroyer and gone dark momentarily, but notice how we're sailing in a straight line to the right of the screen. We're going to hold that for a second because we're still spotted by the gearing, and we're imagining he's looking at his torpedo indicator right now, and he's probably already launched his torpedoes. We gave him about 10-20 seconds. That should have been enough. We knew he launched only one set at our friendly DD, so he's got one left over, and it's going to be coming our way. What do? We turn away from our course. I think we slowed down a little bit, maybe not, but we could have done that as well. And what do you know? We easily dodged the torpedoes, even though they do take out our friendly destroyer. And that was done without the use of the sonar. That was done by imagining ourselves in the enemy DD's shoes, and because we have a lot of experience playing DDs ourselves, we were able to successfully predict where the torps would be and when they would be launched, and we were able to avoid them with several kilometers to spare in a ship which has a turning circle over 1,000 meters. So, hopefully, you find these tips useful. Again, I can't stress it enough. If you are a battleship main who has a problem dealing with torpedoes, then start to learn destroyers. It'll help you out tremendously. And as for the GK, I think it's much more worth playing these days. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.